Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason, and today I want to talk about building Zion. I know this is a Constitution channel, but I think I know. I've looked up enough quotes on the subject from prophets, recent prophets from my lifetime. These aren't obscure quotes. These are verifiable quotes. And so, building Zion seems to be kind of our main purpose in these last days. We're building Zion, and that involves, President Young, for example, Brigham Young said that he wanted the people, the church, not only to go out and share the gospel of Jesus Christ, but the system of liberty that our Savior gave us in these last days. And I don't have the direct quote with me, but I've shared it on this channel before, so I'm always paraphrasing when I'm driving down the road. David O McKay said, and I'm going to use this quote as the foundation for my concept here, because I feel like there's a massive awakening that came to me one time when I was making a video and bringing this quote up. He says, "Next to being one in worshiping God, there is nothing upon which the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should be more united than in upholding and defending the Constitution of the United States." Okay, so why would he say worship God and then uphold the Constitution when the Savior said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy strength? Something to that effect. Again, I haven't looked up all of the subscribers recently. I need to look them up and remind myself. Lists are important, but it's a total love, and then love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, David O McKay said worshiping God, and then he said upholding and defending the Constitution of the United States. Well, the Constitution helps establish correct principles of interaction, keeps us from having our representative government exercise tyranny on our behalf against our neighbor, and frees us up, if it's followed correctly, to do the most possible good in helping our neighbor. Okay, so the most possible good. So I want to dive deeper into these two concepts, though. So I thought for the concept of worshiping God that I would go into what Joseph Smith taught us in the Lectures on Faith, which used to be part of Doctrine and Covenants, isn't anymore, but is still a verifiable, solid, non-obscure teaching from the prophet Joseph Smith. And so Joseph Smith said, in order to be able to exercise faith, that one, we needed to know three things. One, that God actually exists, right? Which I would connect that to when Joseph Smith said also that the most important point of our religion is that Jesus Christ was crucified and then rose again on the third day, right? So why would he say that? And then everything else is an appendage to that. Because if Jesus Christ really was crucified, actually killed, and then still rose on the third day anyhow, who else could do that but God? So that means that, God actually exists, right? And then the second thing that Lectures on Faith, Joseph Smith said that we needed to know was the true character of God, right? Physically who he is, and mentally, socially, emotionally perhaps, right? Those kind of concepts. We need to know who God is. All right, that he is probably more like unto us than what the potential we have to be, that maybe we realize the time the gospel was restored, right? And so that puts a lot of pressure on us then. For the third thing, in order to be able to exercise faith, we need to know that we're living our lives in a manner that is pleasing unto God. Okay? So, now God has told us that which is pleasing unto Him. And there's a lot of what we can do that's pleasing unto God, that's visible for the whole world to see. But some of the real tests of what's pleasing unto God that He has given us clear instructions on are what we do in our private time and our political nature, right? So yes, are we bringing politics into this? I guess kind of. That's the way Elder H. Rowland Anderson said it in his book, The Great and Abominable Church. Or in other words, people tend to think that since government's doing it on their behalf, that they're not accountable for it, because it's not really them doing it. It's the representative government doing it. But nothing could be further from the truth. It is the same as though you're doing it, and it shows the truest part of our character to a certain degree, whatever it is that we're willing to have government do for us on our behalf with no consequences for ourselves, right? So again, I would say two of the greatest indicators are, again, what we're like in our personal life and then our political life, right? So in our personal lives, we should see that we are fighting to be the best person we can be in our business relationships, in our marriage, in our thoughts, in our words and our deeds. Well, our words, they really don't come out too much unless you're like me and you're out in nature a lot, and then you kind of sometimes walk around analyzing things and talk to yourself, I suppose, which that doesn't mean there's anything mentally wrong with you. It's just a way of sorting out your thoughts. It's one of the best memorization techniques out there. And then, politically, we have a pretty clear lecture, established doctrine, that I can point to at least 3 spots where Ezra Taft Benson said it. Concepts covered by Dallin H. Oakes on at least a couple of occasions. That's basically either the proper role of government, you could say, or the maximum freedom, or government has a limited proper role, however you want to say it. So, and if we're voting for government to do things outside of its proper role and thinking that's fine because government's doing it, it's not really us doing it. So anyhow, now let's go ahead and dig into this building Zion concept then. So building Zion, John Adams said our Constitution was only sufficient for a moral and religious people. We should be moral and religious. We should know that our lifestyle we have is pleasing unto God. Part of what God has asked is that we be a charitable people. That's one of the greatest gifts that we can develop is charity, right? So charity should naturally flow from us. We shouldn't have to worry about government doing it. We've been directly told that's not part of the proper role of government. So if we vote for it, we can pretty much readily know that we're on a course that's not pleasing unto God. Okay? I'm just saying. I'm just quoting doctrine. Look up Ezra Taft Benson, look up Dallin H. Oakes, look up H. Rowland Anderson, all these general authorities, and they're not the only ones. And then Thomas Jefferson said that we should be an agrarian society. The cultivators of the land are the greatest benefit to society, to the human race, that they're the most virtuous people, they're the most tied to the land and its well-being, right? And virtue back then meant more than just sexual virtue or however you want to say it, law of chastity type stuff, but it also meant a sort of valor, a sort of a courageousness, right? And we've been explicitly taught again and again to become a self-reliant people, to become a people. We recently heard Dallin H. Oakes in the most recent General Conference praise the days of the family economy and the farmers and the gardeners and the people who grew their crops and did all that kind of stuff. He praised that. So how much temptation would it take away from the government to become a corrupt government if we were a more cultivator of the land type of people in one way or another? There could be many different ways of doing that. Whether it be a little, I would look up the Dallin talk. That's all, or there's an old Relief Society manual from the early 2000s that was still being printed that had significant chapters on that. Basic homesteading practices and everything like that. We have plenty of teachings on food storage and water storage. Prepare for the Days of Tribulation is a great talk by Ezra, Taft, Benson. I'm sorry, there's an abundance of sources on the topic. I'll just stop commenting on that. It shouldn't be hard to find. We will prove them herewith by Elder Bender. I looked that one up. Now, moving on then to building Zion and the Constitution side of it. J. Reuben Clark said that the Constitution is the basic law of Zion. Harold B. Lee said the law to go forth from Zion that was prophesied for the last days. America being Zion, and then building Zion around the rest of the world was the Constitution. And again, I've already quoted or paraphrased Brigham Young talking about the same thing, that we all want to go out. We want to teach the gospel. We also want to teach the liberties, right, that God wants for us in these last days. And we already heard David O McKay, that we, next to being one and worshiping God, there's nothing upon which the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should be more united than upholding and defending the Church, the Constitution of the United States. Dallin H. Oaks said, our belief the Constitution is divinely inspired gives members of the Church a unique responsibility to defend the United States Constitution and principles of constitutionality wherever they live. The Constitution in Heavenly Banner, the talk given at BYU, was comparable to the recent talk given on mantles by Dallin H. Oaks, in that at the introduction to the talk, President Jeffrey R. Holland, president of BYU at the time, said, Ezra Taft Benson, President Ezra Taft Benson at the Bicentennial of the Constitution, is directing this talk about the United States Constitution to all members of the church around the world. Okay? We had a letter come out when I was on my mission around like 1999 or so, where the first presidency, which would have been Gordon B. Hinckley, James E. Faust, and Thomas S. Monson, said, we're supposed to be building Zion where we live, where we're from. There was a lot of this idea that had been passed on for generations to move to Utah and then maybe eventually move to Missouri or something like that, right? And they wanted to kind of remove that kind of myth, or that traditional myth, from the membership and say, hey, Zion is to be built around the entire world. This is what we are trying so hard to do. And again, in order to build Zion, we're preaching the worshiping of God, or in other words, the gospel of Jesus Christ, or in other words, that he was crucified, then rose again on the third day, and all the appendages to that, right? And the other thing is we're trying to spread constitutional liberties, right? Okay, I want to talk, there's principles of the Constitution. I would look them up in defending our divinely inspired Constitution. But leading up to that, we need to talk about the Declaration of Independence. Wilford Woodruff in particular, and he's not the only one, but he's the one who received the direct visit from the Founding Fathers, particularly the signers of the Declaration of Independence, saying, we did what we were supposed to do, what God literally called us to do. We didn't apostatize from it, and you still haven't done our work for us. So you need to do our work for us. Now, Wilford Woodruff, commenting on them, said they were the best of men that the God of heaven could find on the earth at the time. To me, that's an endorsement of, we really need to look at them as though a lot of what they taught that was closely related to what they did is a part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? And I'm just going to kind of point to 4 categories real quick that I came to. I do quick research on these topics, but I also live my life studying these. So this is just part of who I am for well over a decade at this point. But first off, that human equality, right? So all men are created equal. We're all human. All goats are goats. All dogs are dogs, right? That's one of the reasons I don't like to dehorn my goats. It's a disrespect to the goats. It takes away some of their goathood, some of their goatness, right? So, so equality of humanity, okay? And then unalienable rights. Samuel Adams, in The Rights of the Colonists, said that there are certain rights that are absolutely unalienable, and that even if I get tricked into signing a contract that signs away supposedly one of my natural rights that are completely unalienable in the first place, that contract, once I realized that they asked me to sign over something null and void, or unconscionable, against the laws of nature, and nature's God, that's an unalienable right, that contract is null and void. That's how unalienable they thought they were, right? When a government becomes destructive to the ends of those unalienable rights, that it is the right and the duty of the people to abolish such government. That governments are formed by the consent of the governed, right? So then that's principle 3, consent of the governed. So who forms the government? Who allows it to be formed? Who's the source of government power? As the first principle in defending our divinely inspired Constitution says, it's we the people. Everything that the government does, then we're ultimately accountable for it. So then, coming to the fourth principle that our founders would have basically understood is a duty to prevent tyranny, is the way I'm going to summarize it. You can go deeper and more specific, but basically, if you let tyranny develop in your own country, and then your own country either exercises even more tyranny on the next generation, or on a neighboring country or something like that, you're accountable to it, right? You will answer for it, and this is based on stuff that H. Verlin Anderson has said too. It's not just me saying stuff that's non-doctrinal. But I'm trying to focus on what the founders taught us, that I think qualified them to be those people that showed up to the St. George Temple. What they taught us really is pretty darn important. And so that's it. So again, the 4 points that I kind of summed them up real quick this morning as is equality of humanity, unalienable rights, that even if you sign them away, you can't sign them away. It's impossible to. Consent to the governed is what forms government, and then the duty to prevent tyranny. I'll simply say that much. Okay, so now the Constitution, if it were actually followed in its details, and the only way you can know those details is to befriend it, and in order to befriend it, as L. Tom Perry said in his talk Truth and Liberty, you have to read it, you have to study it, you have to know what the actual Constitution is. Not what the Federalist Papers say, not what this says, not what that says. You need to know what the actual Constitution says. Okay? The Federalist Papers can be useful sometimes for mentally sorting out some of the weird, lengthy run-on sentences with semicolons and this and that, right? So, where it actually followed, if you actually knew what it said, in particular what Dallin H. Oakes complimented in his talk defending our divinely inspired Constitution, which is at least Articles 1 through 7 of the preamble and the Bill of Rights. Violations of those laws of nature and of nature's God would generally go away. Religious freedom would abound, and it would be easier for people to feel motivated to study and try to find, that pursuit of happiness, that pursuit of being on a course that pleases God. And so the Constitution really is an important thing. I would 100% agree with David O McKay when we're building Zion, next to being one and worshiping God, there's nothing. The members of the Church of Jesus Christ should be more united than on upholding and defending the United States Constitution. In particular, that version is the one that God said He established, and those principles are sound. And I think if you want to contribute to building Zion, you need to be on that quest of studying your scriptures, understanding what your course is, and understanding that part of your course that pleases God is a knowledge, a befriending of the Constitution and an upholding of it, maintaining of it, as it says in Doctrine and Covenants 101. And you can, how can that not be valuable? One of the more valuable contributions you can give to building Zion. If you understand the relationships between the states and the federal government, and between the different branches of the federal government, the distribution of responsibility, the breaking up, kind of like of callings, right? Of different levels of priesthood and things like that in the church. When we're getting into as I understand it, when the millennium starts, when the second coming happens, I think it's been pretty well established too that it's not just going to be members of the church left on the earth, but that it will also be non-members, So you can say our church already has a good enough system, maybe they'll restart the law of consecration, something like that, maybe, but wouldn't you want to have that knowledge of what God said He established, and especially be able to contribute in those days? So to me, hopefully this is useful to you guys, but I really think that when it comes to building Zion, we need to know those lectures on faith points, that God actually exists, what's His true character, is our course, the course that He endorses, and then we need to know the Constitution and the laws of nature and of nature's God, those four categories I said, and how the Constitution helps